Happy Veterans Day, special edition coming to you from the Rising Eagle Studios here at the Warrior Healing Center. I was in the Veterans Day parade this morning, and oh my God, it was beautiful. The turnout that they had today, it was just amazing. So Cochise County, thank you for that. That was just, words can't express it. Thank you very much for that. So today's special guest is Tim Kirk. Tim, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it so
pleasure,
much.
Yeah.
Tim is the founder of the Warrior Healing Center, and this building exists, this organization exists because Tim has such a good heart and cares for our veterans. And him and Kathy came up with this group that we now know as the Warrior Healing Center. And so to get things started, Tim, would you mind sharing with us what branch of the military you were in?
Yeah, I was in the Air Force.
Okay. Can you give us a little bit of idea, like what was one of your most cherished memories while you were on active duty?
Oh, there's lots of them, but I think probably the most fun one was when I was in Alaska, and we were stationed up in Eielson Air Force Base, which is by Fairbanks.
Okay.
It's about 20 miles south of Fairbanks, and we had a big wartime tasking sending A-10s to Afghanistan in 2004, when we were really starting to ramp back up after Iraq.
Okay.
And it was a huge challenge to do all this in the middle of the winter in Alaska, to prep all these A-10s to go to Afghanistan for 6 months. And it was just a lot of fun. And we were able to get all of our jets combat ready and sent downrange, at once, which,
wow.
A-10 was a aging aircraft at the time. Now it's been upgraded and improved and modified and stuff. But back then there was really no guarantee that you were going to be able to get all your jets because of parts and stuff like that. So we were able to do that, and the team did a great job. And it was very cold on the March morning when they took off, but it was an exciting experience.
What was your rank at that time in the Air Force?
Oh, at that time I was a captain.
Captain?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the ranks are structured a little bit different in the Air Force, correct, than they are to other branches?
No, they're about the same.
Are they?
Army and Air Force officer ranks are almost identical.
Oh, okay.
Same with Marines. The Navy's different.
It's the Navy? Okay.
The Navy's always different, those sailors.
Yeah. Anchors away.
That's right. They cross the equator, things get weird.
For those of you that have joined us or recently joined us, if you have any questions or comments, please make sure to put it down here in the comments section. I'll be happy to pass it on to Tim as we go along here. So that was one of your most cherished memories. What was one of your best duty stations? Was that also in Alaska then, or?
Yeah, either Alaska or Korea. I was stationed at Osan Air Base in Korea for a year, and that was probably the most, enjoyable thing. The thing that I really liked about Korea was everything was focused on the mission. I mean, everyone was there for a 1 year or a 2 year tour.
Okay.
And they were there just to do their job. So it's like a deployment, except more so, in that people didn't have a lot of extra stuff. They didn't have, the kids' soccer games or, the PTA meetings and stuff like that normally expand to fill, your time.
Right.
Whereas there, everything was ready to fight tonight. And so the time I spent there was probably my favorite duty station because it was so focused.
One of my favorite stories that I'd like to share that Kathy shared with me, it was a hard job for you to do, was when you were at the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm.
And you were tasked with, what was your position there at the Pentagon?
Well, I started off doing studies for the Air Force for the Quadrennial Defense Review and was kind of in charge of the research for that.
Okay.
And then I got picked up to be the speechwriter for the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, which is our highest ranking
Guys,
officer.
get that? Chief of Staff. Wow.
Yeah. And then I did that for 2 Chiefs of Staff, and then subsequently got picked up to be the speechwriter for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff,
Okay.
Admiral Mullen. So he had a whole speechwriting team. I was kind of in charge of that, and it was really an eye-opening experience.
You're pretty eloquent with words. How did you get that way? What kind of training did you have? Did you like education or?
No, in fact, I never even saw myself as a writer. I never applied. Normally, these positions, people make an application to,
Right.
and there's a competition and stuff like that. So they're very competitive positions because they tend to be high visibility. Your boss is the highest ranking guy in the organization.
Yep.
So the promotion rate is usually pretty good. But I didn't apply for either of those jobs. I got tapped to do it on the basis of the writing that I was doing for the QDR. But I credit any writing ability or skill that I had because I was writing so many enlisted performance reports
Okay.
and award packages and stuff like that for my troops that I just wrote nonstop from when I came in the Air Force to when I went to the Pentagon. I just was writing about my troops nonstop. And, it's one of these things where grammatical errors and typos hurt your troops' chances of getting awards and
Right.
decorations and
Right.
promotions. So it forced me to be very precise, to really pay attention to the rules, the audience that I was writing for, and so forth. And I think years of doing that just prepared me for that job. And like I said, I never thought of myself as a writer, but suddenly I ended up writing for 10 years every day, and that made it happen.
How did you get tasked to write for the Fort Hood tragedy that happened for those service members? Because one of the things that I do remember Kathy telling me was that you actually took the time and researched each individual's life. A lot of people, I don't think, do that, and Tim took the time to do that. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that? Or
Sure. So I was writing for the chairman at the time, Admiral Mullen, and you have to understand this guy. He's Navy 4-star. He had been the chief of naval operations for the Navy, which is their highest ranking officer, and then got moved up to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and just really a sailor's sailor. I mean, just an amazing leader. He had been a ship's captain in several challenging environments and was just all about the troops.
Right.
And he, a not so secret thing about the Pentagon is they have these things called a auto pen, where they will scan a senior officer's signature so that they can put his signature on certificates and stuff like that. And Admiral Mullen refused to use an auto pen. He wanted his signature to be his signature. He wanted to read everything, and he really understood the importance of written communication. So he was a real stickler for that. And when the tragedy at Fort Hood took place, it was only natural. Every senior leader in the chain of command was going to do letters of condolence to the families.
Right.
But I had seen enough when I was writing for the Chief of Staff of the Air Force that some senior leaders just kind of do a boilerplate letter, kind of a generic letter that doesn't go too deep into the situation. And I just knew that Admiral Mullen would not be interested in that at all. And if you watch right now, the Pentagon spokesperson is John Kirby. He's a retired admiral, John Kirby. But at the time, he was the public affairs chief for Admiral Mullen, captain in the Navy, which is in '06.
Okay.
And I worked with him, and we both agreed that these letters need to be what the families deserve. Very heartfelt, genuine, personalized. And so I went, and plus, because of the way the families work, you may have parents that are no longer married, and now they've married somebody else.
Right.
So that what would normally be one letter to the parents is now two letters. Or maybe the parents are deceased and there's brothers and sisters. We ended up needing 34 letters to really cover all those bases.
And a lot of research went into that.
Yeah, because you don't want family members going to a funeral or a memorial ceremony and maybe pulling out their letters and comparing what they got, and if they're word for word or similar, then it feels less genuine. So I spent about 2 weeks studying the careers and lives of the victims so that we could have detail that would, spread out to all these letters. Like, were they the cut up joker in their basic training class, or were they the quiet person that stood in the corner? Were they the party animal, or were they, more a Netflix and chill type person? Right. All that nuance was important, I think, to really communicating the necessary level of sympathy and condolence. So that's what I went for, was finding out as much as possible about these troops, and including that in the notes so that they could all be unique. They could be really reflective of the service of all these people who had sacrificed so much. So
that's why I wanted to ask you just a little bit about it, because when Kathy told me that story, I just like, wow, that's just something that you don't hear about, every day. And thank God we have leaders like that.
Yeah, he was very much like that. I really respected him. And in that position, it's not easy, because you're talking about a national event, a national catastrophe.
Right.
And such a bizarre kind of quote unquote blue on blue, it was just weird, and it didn't make sense to families, how their person isn't deployed yet, they're still stateside, and they get gunned down in a deployment prep by
their own service member,
by another service member. He really did a great job in making those families feel appropriately cherished, and just the sympathy that was extraordinary. It's one thing if you get shot by the enemy in the battlefield. That's bad enough.
Right.
But when it happens at home, that's just so tragic for so many people.
Just out of curiosity, because I don't know it, so I'm asking this, does a service member that gets wounded in an instant like that, are they eligible for a Purple Heart?
That was a big debate at the time.
Okay.
And it took years to sort that out because, how do you characterize that? Is that enemy action? Well, it's a friendly, supposed to be friendly person.
Right.
So it's not a uniformed opponent, a uniformed foe. So how does it get categorized? But if I'm not mistaken, after years of debate back and forth, they finally awarded the Combat Service Medal, the normal stuff, the Purple Heart and Bronze Star for those guys, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that any service member that gets wounded in action, whether they're here training or abroad defending our country, should be eligible for it. That's my opinion.
Yeah, well, it's been a challenge over the past 20 years with these wars, because so many of the wounds are invisible.
Yes.
The PTSD type wounds and the psychological wounds, those aren't bullet holes. And
right.
So people who go into these combat situations over the past 20 years, they're not eligible for a Purple Heart because they didn't get shot, but their disability, their wound, and the impact to their life is greater than if they did get shot. So you have some people that are, killed in weird circumstances, like we talked about at Fort Hood, but then other people whose lives are destroyed by psychological wounds. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who get Purple Hearts because there was a rocket attack and, a piece of shrapnel scraped their arm. Doesn't ruin their life. The scrape heals up. Their lives go back to normal, but they get the Purple Heart. So it's been a challenge, I think, for the country to appropriately recognize the people who have sacrificed, because it's just not easy. It's not traditionally what warfare has looked like. So,
well, and then you have not PTSD, but a lot of different things can trigger and cause PTSD, including sexual trauma. And there was an article in the paper a couple of days ago that was very well written about one of the DAV service members and what she went through. And it's just to read these stories, it's just like, it's very heartbreaking
absolutely,
that our service members have to go through this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
Yeah.
So getting back to your military career, tell us a little bit about what you did when you were in Afghanistan.
So I delivered those letters of condolence to Admiral Mullen, and as I did, it just dawned on me that, I'm sitting here in a cushy office in the Pentagon, and all these guys were getting ready to go over to the Middle East, to fight, and I just felt like, I can't stay here in the cushy office knowing that these guys were supposed to go, and they, got cut down getting ready to go. So I just told my boss, look, I've got to go. I need to go to the combat theater, and I want to go not just on a standard rotation. I want to go, for the duration, basically an open-ended thing, so that I can really focus on the problem in Afghanistan. Because if you remember at the time, this is 2008, 2009.
Right.
And President Obama had just been elected, and he was advancing the idea that Afghanistan was the good war. Iraq was the bad war, Afghanistan was the good war, and he was putting special emphasis on Afghanistan. And so we had been doing a lot to reflect that emphasis on Afghanistan by creating the Afghanistan Hands program, which took members of the military and sent them to language school so they could learn how to communicate with Afghans, and then sent them to special positions in Afghanistan. And so I was familiar with it, having been writing these documents and stuff talking about the program. And so the boss asked me, well, would you be interested in this program? Because I've challenged the other senior leaders of the services to send their best and brightest. If I send my own speechwriter, then I'm, walking the talk. And I said, yeah, absolutely. That would be what I have in mind. So I went to language school, went to specialized combat training, and then went to Afghanistan for 2 years, where I was able to speak the language, spend most of my time outside the wire, working with locals and doing stuff.
Was that a 2-year tour?
It was a deployment, so it was just a 2-year deployment.
Okay.
I remained stationed at the Pentagon.
Okay.
And then deployed for 2 years.
2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But uninterrupted. That's right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yep. And that was a challenge, because when you deploy, you're working 7 days a week. There's no vacations or holidays or anything like that. And 2 years of doing that straight was exhausting. But it was very rewarding in the sense of the stuff that we got accomplished. I was working in the anti-corruption task force, and you'll be able to see in the reporting of the news, if you go back and look in like March, April of 2010,
Okay.
we broke a big corrupt operation at the National Military Hospital in Afghanistan, where the Afghan general in charge of their military hospital was stealing the medications that we were buying for him and selling them on the black market. And Afghan soldiers were getting surgery without anesthesia. They were, dying of infections and wounds. They were dying of hunger and thirst, just kind of being put in a room and locked up and stuff like that. So I was on the team that that discovered that and worked that. That was a very big deal. And then, of course, we had if you remember, there was a whole bunch of missing Humvees and weapons unaccounted for. We worked on that. And we did a lot of anti-drug operations as well. So it was a really interesting time, kind of more James Bond than the most military people's experience would have. I was just very fortunate to get involved with that, and I hated to leave. I mean, literally, when they said you have to go, I didn't want to go back home because of how important the work was. But they didn't send me home. They sent me to Africa to do the same thing. So
would it be fair to say that you built some really good relationships, but it took a long time, right, to earn the trust of the Afghani people? And
yeah, absolutely. That was the biggest asset I think that I was fortunate enough to get involved with and bring to the table was, because most people are there for either 6 months or a year. And so when you're only there for 6 months or a year, there's a limited amount of relationship that you can build. There's a limited amount of knowledge that you can build. So when you stay there 2 years, you've got such a bigger opportunity to build those relationships because you're not temporary. The Afghans were viewing Americans as temporary,
right?
Because they saw you come through every 6 months to a year. And as I said, I had applied for a third year and had it approved initially, and then it got turned down because they wanted me in Africa. But the key idea for staying the third year was you had all these relationships built up,
right?
That when you go back home, that just kind of goes poof, and they're no longer useful.
And then whoever took your position has to re-earn and start all over again.
Yep.
Earning that trust back. And
just the general knowledge. I mean, once you learn, the way the city streets work and the way the traffic patterns are and where the safe places are, where they aren't, it takes you a while. When you move to a new city, it takes basically a year to really figure out where all the bathrooms are, right?
Yep.
And if you imagine, the complexity of going to Afghanistan, you're talking about 5 or 6 cities that are, significant in the country, plus the countryside, the individual regions of the rural areas that have their own unique kind of issues or characteristics. You just can't learn all that in a year. And if you rotate in and out, you can learn it over time, but it's hard for those relationships to work. Yep. So being there for 3 years was going to be huge because, I just figured out all the cities and who's who and what the regional politics are and stuff like that, and had to leave. So I was bummed when I had to go. I know that sounds weird, but and then I got to my new duty station in Germany, which was working on the Africa problem, and Benghazi happened 10 days after I got there. I reported for duty on September 1st, and September 11th, 2012 is when Benghazi happened. So I'm just sitting there watching this whole thing happen, and
So that was what, 11 years after the attack on America, then,
mm-hmm,
right?
yep,
On the same day,
yep,
9/11.
yep.
Wow.
Yeah, so my life was immediately consumed with North Africa because that happened, and then the French wanted to invade Mali to kick out the Islamic extremists and restore the normal government that the French had been working with. And I was put in charge of helping the French uh, do their thing. And so, yeah, I spent a good year and a half immersed in Africa, languages and culture and stuff like that.
So when President Biden announced, okay, we are pulling out of Afghanistan,
Mm-hmm.
uh, did you think it was time or do you think we still needed to be there? I know that the way it was handled was horrible,
Right.
but, and I don't know, maybe if you don't want to give your opinion, that's fine.
No, it's
My opinion was, I think it was time for our troops to come home, but it just was not, it didn't go good.
yeah. Well, and it wasn't just Biden. I mean, to be fair, Trump planned on pulling out
Right.
as well.
Was the date actually sent by President Trump? I don't remember.
Yeah, it was supposed to be in May.
Was it?
And then they slipped it.
Okay.
I don't know why they slipped it to September, but that's
Okay.
kind of what they had in mind. I've been opposed to pulling out of Afghanistan in the Trump administration and in the Biden administration,
Okay.
simply because I know what's possible when we stay engaged. And the example I always use is South Korea. People annoy me when they refer to Afghanistan as America's longest war, because I'm like, look, we went to war in Korea in 1950, signed a ceasefire in 1953. A ceasefire is not an end of the war. It's an armistice. It's
Right.
you put your guns away, we'll put ours away, but if yours come out, it's back on. So we had a ceasefire agreement in 1953, and then nothing else until today. There's been no treaty, no peace deal, no reunification or anything like that in Korea.
And that's 60, going on what, over 60 years now?
70 years.
70?
Yeah. It'll be.
Oh, that's right. My math was
Yeah.
10 years. Yeah, 70 years.
So to me, that's a much better candidate for America's longest war because, when you go to Korea, you get the same combat pay and stuff like that than when you deploy to Afghanistan. It's like,
Okay.
or at least, for the vast majority of the history of that conflict, it's been indistinguishable because North Korea has hundreds of missiles and rockets and artillery pointed at our bases in the south. I mean, it's safe day to day, but it's safe right up until it isn't.
Yep. You never know what Kim's going to do.
That's right. And you have to be ready. So we never, quote unquote, built the nation of South Korea. We just stayed engaged there with our military presence and with our
Right.
diplomatic presence. And look what happened. You went from vast devastation in 1953, where there was hardly any schools, any hospitals, no services or anything like that, to today, where the most popular band in the world is BTS. The leading manufacturer of cell phones is Samsung and LG. They're the semiconductor capital of the
Yep.
world. This tiny country the size of Indiana is now the 10th largest GDP in the world, and they're hosting the Olympics. They're doing well in the Olympics whenever it's on the road, and they've mastered cell phone technology and stuff like that in a way no one else has. Well, we didn't do that. The Korean people did that. And how did the Korean people do that? They did that with the security, the umbrella of protection that the United States military and diplomacy provided. And if you just gave those people the chance, gave them the stability and peace that they needed, they created for themselves this behemoth of Western-style democracy and economic success. And I feel that the very same is true in Afghanistan. 70% of the population is under the age of 30 in Afghanistan. They don't remember life under the
Under
Taliban
the
the first
Taliban
time.
at all?
Yeah.
No.
And they all want the same thing. Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, they get it. And so all those people need is that same sort of umbrella of security. But when we pull out, Pakistan sends in the Taliban, and they take everything down. They don't let people listen to music. They don't let women go to school, et cetera, et cetera. You've seen it all before.
And it didn't take long to collapse, did it?
Just like that. They're just a brutal regime, a bunch of thugs. And these guys, I mean, I can tell you I've worked this problem for a long time. The Taliban is just the Pakistani army in civilian clothes, okay? They're drug fiends, drug lords, thugs. I mean, if you watch on Netflix, watch the series Narcos, I mean, that's who these guys are. Just the ones that live in a different place and speak a different language. But they're just thugs. And, they pretend to want to subjugate women because that's Sharia law and that's holy and righteous and stuff like that. That is a total lie. They don't think of it that way. Because if you go to Pakistan, guess what you see? Women walking around uncovered. There's openly gay behavior in cities like Karachi. They don't believe this stuff. They're just using this stuff to create economic and military advantage for themselves, dealing with the threat or perceived threat from India. So it's a whole different ball game going on there, very similar to North Korea, South Korea, where the North Koreans are hostile towards the South Koreans, and they're constantly trying to mess with them. I don't think we should give up South Korea to the North Koreans.
No.
I don't think we should give up Afghanistan to the thugs in Pakistan. And General H.R. McMaster, who became National Security Advisor, he was my boss in Afghanistan, and I think he said it best. Just because you decide to disengage from a war doesn't mean the war is over. The enemy gets a vote, and you see it. Just because we disengage from Afghanistan doesn't mean American troops are going to stop dying. It doesn't mean that Americans are going to stop dying. You look in Afghanistan, they just appointed an al-Qaeda kingpin to the Afghan government. It's just a matter of time. All you've done is given them the best recruiting poster they could ever have. Hey, we defeated the United States.
And then they're going to have all the training camps coming back in.
And it turns into the world's biggest salt lick for Islamic nut jobs. And they come in and then they feed them drugs, illicit drugs that mess up their minds. And that's how they get suicide bombers. That's how they get operatives that go overseas to hurt people. And they do it all in the name of righteousness or whatever. And nobody believes it. The average Afghan citizen doesn't believe any of that stuff. They hate that stuff. They don't want that stuff. So if you have 30 million people who want to have economic opportunity, education, and the internet, and you have 20 or 30,000 that are drug nuts that just want to create havoc for everybody else, who are you going to side with? And we can't say it's none of our business because we went there for a long, long time and kind of set the stage. So we have an opportunity, we have an obligation, and we tried abandoning this part of the world before. We fought the Soviets in Afghanistan, and as soon as they left, we left, and 10 years later, you had 9/11.
9/11 happened.
All the stuff in between, the embassy bombings, the coal, all this stuff that we all remember who've been around. It's just dumb. It's dumb because you've built up this goodwill and capability in all these people in Afghanistan. And you're just going to have it go back. I mean, that's the bottom line. You can't ignore this place because of its significance geographically and geopolitically. And so we're just going to end up having to go back. Or more accurately, future generations will have to go back. Our sons and daughters and their sons and daughters will have to go back. And when they go back, it'll be more expensive and more intense because of what we've left in our wake. The reputation that Americans are cowards, that we leave in the middle of the night, that we can't be relied on as partners.
We left behind some of our airplanes and vehicles and military
and our own
equipment.
people. We left our own people.
Yeah.
It's just a terrible, terrible reputation to have in Asian culture, because Asian cultures don't think of respect the way that we do. They respect strength. They respect devotion, dedication, in a way that we'll never understand in our American culture. We respect celebrity.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly.
We got the eye on the wrong prize.
Right, right. And the bottom line is, leaving there created so many more problems than staying there. We hadn't had an American casualty there for 2 years prior to when we left.
When those Marines, the 13 Marines were killed.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason why was because the Afghan people were taking all the casualties. The Afghan army was taking the casualties, the Afghan police, the border police. They were taking the casualties because we had trained them up to do that. But they were relying on us for support. Our air support, our intelligence support, and our material support was what kept them going.
And when we pulled out, we took all of that with us.
And so there, people make a big deal about they didn't fight when the Taliban came in. They didn't have the capability to fight. They just didn't have all the stuff that they had been trained to do before. So their vehicle maintenance wasn't done. Their aircraft maintenance wasn't done. They basically had the equivalent of sticks and stones to fight against the Pakistani army.
Well, when it happened, when we announced and started drawing down, didn't some of the Afghani fighter pilots go to a different country?
Yeah,
they
flew to Uzbekistan.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. We had a really capable fighting force in the Afghan national security forces, as long as we supported them with our intelligence and air capability. Mm-hmm. It takes a generation. You look at the Korean army. The Korean army today really doesn't need us. They need us, but they don't really need us. If they got into a war with North Korea today, the South Korean army would be just fine, because they've had 70 years to build up, the professional competencies,
right,
the tradition, the things that make the esprit de corps of a fighting unit high. In Afghanistan, we had just gotten started, 20 years into it when we cut it off. And when you cut that stuff off, it doesn't just work on its own. I'd have a more reasonable expectation of having my 3-year-old daughter drive me to work in the morning. It just isn't going to happen. And so the best thing for us was to not cut it off, in my opinion. And we did, and now we're gonna feel the pain.
The only way I can equate to it is, imagine being an American, born in our country, growing up. You're like 10 or 15 years old, and all of a sudden we're a communist country. That's kind of like what it's like for anybody that was born in Afghanistan while we were there and had a presence. And then when we're gone, it didn't take the country a day to collapse, it seemed like. Yeah. And now all these young adults that are growing up in Afghanistan that had this way of life, now it's gone.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If you wanted to pull out on the cheap and easy, the year to do that was like 2003. And you already missed that boat. And so now you're in it. And if you're in it, you might as well win it. And the way to win is by not disengaging. And you look at Japan, you look at Germany, you look at Korea. These are all examples of countries that were absolutely devastated 70 years ago, but today are leading the world. Japan just hosted the Olympics. They've got the world's biggest city in Tokyo. They have amazing, amazing economic initiatives and industrial initiatives. You remember when all of a sudden every TV and radio you buy in the store was Japanese.
Japanese made.
Yeah, because they actually listened to the people that we sent over there to advise them on production and industry and economics.
And they were buying a lot of American businesses too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to this day, one of the best cars you can buy is a Toyota, and that all has its roots in the reconstruction of Afghanistan or of Japan. But we didn't reconstruct Japan. The Japanese people did.
Right.
And we just secured the space so that they could do that. It's the same story every time it's tried, and it works every time it's tried. You just can't get weak at the knees and, give in to the muscle. That's not, in my opinion, an American trait, to give in to bullies.
No.
To give in to thugs. And that's what we did. So, like I said, we'll be back. Just give it time.
I do want to touch on some of the stuff that you're doing here at the Warrior Healing Center, so I'd like for you to come back and talk with me a little bit more on that when you have time, because there's a bunch of really great stories we'd like to share on that too. Just a couple quick comments in the section here. Crystal, thank you for joining us, and thank you for your comment. Also, Kathy made a very good comment here. The invisible wounds are sometimes so much more debilitating than the physical ones, because the people who interact with veterans just can't see or appreciate the challenges that they face. And I think that is one of the things that we see clearly here at the Warrior Healing Center with veterans who are in need of services. Very well put, Kathy. And I think that's a great thing to close on here. And for those of you that are watching, thank you so much for joining us. Again, I'd like to have Tim back so we could discuss more about what they're doing here at the Warrior Healing Center and what Kathy touched on. If you're a veteran, happy Veterans Day. Thank you for your service. God bless you guys and gals in the military. I was so proud to see that today. The men and women that were wearing the uniform and presenting the colors at the parade today, outstanding job. Yeah. Great job.
Yep.
So thank you all for your service out there. Have a great day, everybody. Oh, thanks, Debbie. Bye-bye.